Ethan Hayes had everything a man could want: power, wealth, and a penthouse overlooking New York City skyline. Yet, even with billions in his bank account, something felt off. The never-ending boardroom meetings, the shallow conversations at high-end galas, the constant hunger for more, it all left him feeling empty. So, on a whim, he booked a flight to Montana, seeking nothing but a brief escape. He had no idea that stepping into Silver Creek, a town where time moves slower, would change everything.
Hello, I'm going to tell you this incredible story. Put on your headphones for a better experience and sit comfortably because you're going to be moved. Remember that to receive new stories like this, you can subscribe to the channel, like the video, and activate the notification bell. Without further ado, let's get to the rest of the story.
Silver Creek wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of place where people knew each other by name, where the scent of fresh coffee and homemade pies filled the air. It was a world away from the cutthroat business realm Ethan was used to. And that's when he met her, Sophie, a waitress with a radiant smile and an effortless charm that made strangers feel at home. She wasn't like the socialites he knew. There was no pretense, no calculated words, just pure, disarming honesty. Their first conversation wasn't anything grand. It happened over a spilled cup of coffee, a light-hearted joke, and a gaze that lingered just a second too long. But there was something in the way she carried herself. Fearless, independent, completely uninterested in who he was or what he owned. For the first time in years, Ethan felt seen, not as a billionaire but as a man who, perhaps, had been searching for something deeper without even knowing it. Days turned into weeks, and Ethan found himself lingering in Silver Creek longer than planned. Mornings at the local diner became a routine, conversations with Sophie grew longer, and every small detail about her fascinated him. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way she could talk about anything with a contagious passion. He had spent years surrounded by people chasing status, yet here was someone who found joy in the simplest things. It was grounding. One evening, under the glow of the neon diner sign, Sophie looked at him and said, "You know, money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy the feeling of belonging somewhere." The words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent his life building an empire, yet here, in this little town, with a woman who had nothing to do with his world, he felt something he hadn't in years: peace. Could it be that real happiness had nothing to do with the things he had spent his life chasing? Ethan wasn't sure what was happening between them, but he knew one thing: he didn't want to leave. Not yet. There was something about Sophie that made the world feel lighter, like for the first time, he could just exist without the weight of expectations crushing him. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than she let on. She was an open book, but somehow, some pages felt missing. Little did he know, Sophie had her own reasons for keeping a distance. She wasn't just a small-town waitress, and this wasn't just a fleeting connection. Soon, Ethan would uncover a truth so shocking that it would shake everything he thought he knew, not just about her, but about love itself. Ethan had never felt this way before. Love, to him, had always been a transaction, something measured in lavish gifts and extravagant getaways. But with Sophie, it was different. Love wasn't about grand gestures. It was in the quiet moments, in the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, in the way she challenged him to be present. Silver Creek had a way of slowing him down, forcing him to notice the little things, like the way the sunlight hit Sophie's hair in the early mornings, or the way her eyes softened when she talked about the town she called home. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't checking his phone every 5 minutes. Instead, he was riding horseback through endless fields, feeling the wind rush against his skin. He was sitting under a sky full of stars, listening to Sophie talk about life in a way that made him rethink everything. She had no interest in money or power. To her, happiness wasn't found in boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. It was in the way people treated each other, in the beauty of a well-lived life. And the more time he spent with her, the more he started to believe it too. Sophie had a way of making everything feel effortless. She was bold and unfiltered, never afraid to call him out when he was being ridiculous. "You act like money is a personality trait," she teased one evening, nudging him playfully. He had never met someone who spoke to him like that. Someone who saw past the title, past the billionaire image, and simply treated him as Ethan. Not Mr. Hayes, not the CEO, just Ethan. And for some reason, that meant more to him than anything. Every moment with her felt like a lesson, a slow unraveling of everything he thought he knew. He had built an empire, yet Sophie had built a life. A real one. One that didn't revolve around deals and acquisitions, but around people, experiences, and love. And suddenly, he found himself wondering, was he truly living, or was he just existing in a golden cage he had built for himself? The way she saw the world was intoxicating. She found beauty in things he had long overlooked. The sound of rain on an old tin roof, the laughter of kids playing in the streets, the warmth of a handwritten note. He had spent years chasing success, but here in Silver Creek, he found himself chasing something else, something far more important. Her. But even as he fell deeper, something about Sophie felt just out of reach. It wasn't hesitation. It was something else, something unspoken. He saw it in the way her expression shifted when he talked about his past, in the way she sometimes looked at him like she wanted to say something but couldn't. He had no idea that behind that small-town charm lay a secret so big it could change everything. And then, just as their love felt unshakable, the truth surfaced. A truth that shattered every illusion he had built about Sophie. About them. It all started with a single phone call. Ethan hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but the tone in Sophie's voice, urgent, almost fearful, made him stop in his tracks. "No, I can't come back. That life is over," she whispered into the phone, her back turned. The words sent a chill down his spine. Who was she talking to? And what did she mean by that life? The woman he thought he knew suddenly felt like a stranger. And when he confronted her, she didn't deny it. Instead, she looked at him with eyes full of regret, took a deep breath, and told him everything. Sophie wasn't Sophie. She was Amelia Kensington, the missing heiress of a business empire that rivaled his own. Years ago, she had walked away from her fortune, from the expectations that suffocated her, from a world that saw her as nothing more than a last name. She had disappeared without a trace, choosing to build a life on her own terms. Silver Creek wasn't just a place she loved. It was her sanctuary, her escape from a past she never wanted to return to. And now that past had caught up to her. Ethan felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath him. Every moment they had shared, every laugh, every conversation, was it all built on a lie? His mind raced with questions. Had she chosen him, or had she simply been hiding in plain sight? The woman who had taught him that wealth didn't matter had once lived in the very world she claimed to despise. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything he had ever known. She tried to explain, to tell him that her feelings were real, that she had never meant to deceive him. "I wanted you to know me, not the name, not the money, just me," she pleaded. And deep down, a part of him wanted to believe her. But how could he? He had spent his life guarding himself against people who only saw him for his wealth. And now, the one person he had let in had been hiding an even bigger fortune. It wasn't just about the money. It was about trust. And in that moment, trust was the one thing he didn't have. The wedding was just days away, but now, Ethan wasn't sure if there would be one. He had thought he had found something real, something untainted by power or status. But was that ever truly possible? He had spent so much time questioning his own world, but now, he had to question her world, too. Did she really love him? Or had he just been part of a rebellion against a life she wanted to escape? Sophie, or Amelia, stood before him, waiting, hoping. But all Ethan could see was the weight of everything unsaid, the pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even realized he was putting together. He needed time, space, answers. And so, he walked away, leaving behind the woman he loved, unsure if he could ever find his way back. And then, the wedding day arrived. But for the first time, Ethan wasn't sure if he would be standing at the altar. The church was packed. Guests whispered among themselves. their eyes darting toward the grand doors, waiting. The air was thick with anticipation, but Ethan wasn't there. Instead, he stood outside, staring at the wedding venue as if it were some kind of illusion. Inside, Sophie, Amelia, was waiting. The woman he loved, the woman who had lied. His heart and mind were at war, one screaming to run, the other begging him to stay. He had faced billion-dollar deals, hostile takeovers, ruthless competitors, but nothing had ever shaken him like this. He had always prided himself on seeing through deception. Yet, here he was blindsided by the one person he thought was different. If their love had been built on honesty, why had she hidden the truth? The betrayal clawed at his chest, making it hard to breathe. And yet, despite it all, a voice inside him whispered, was it really a lie, or was she just trying to be free? Sophie, no. Amelia hadn't wanted his money, his name, his influence. She had never asked for anything. That was what made this so confusing. Inside the church, Sophie's hands trembled. The minutes passed, and Ethan still hadn't come. People were shifting in their seats, murmuring, their curiosity turning into pity. She had prepared herself for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare her for the weight of waiting. Would he come? Would he choose love over pride? She had spent years running from the life she never wanted, but for the first time, she was terrified of losing the life she had finally built. One where she was simply Sophie, the woman Ethan had fallen for. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his pulse pounding. He could walk away, go back to New York, throw himself into work, pretend none of this had ever happened. But deep down, he knew that would be a lie, his lie. He could picture his life without her, and for the first time, it felt empty. Not the kind of emptiness money could fill, but the kind that settled into your bones and never left. He thought about all the moments they had shared, the laughter, the way she had made him feel alive in ways no amount of wealth ever had. Could he truly let that go? Then, as if his body moved before his mind made a decision, he stepped toward the church. His heartbeat thundered as he pushed the heavy doors open. Every head turned, but he saw only one face. Sophie. She was standing there, her expression unreadable, but her eyes, those eyes, were filled with something raw, something real. Love, hope, fear. Maybe she had hidden the truth, but the way she looked at him now, that was real. And for the first time since discovering the truth, he realized maybe love wasn't about knowing everything. Maybe it was about choosing to stay, even when things weren't perfect. A hush fell over the crowd as Ethan walked toward the altar. Sophie held her breath. He was here, but was he ready to say, I do, or was this just goodbye? Ethan stood before Sophie, his heart hammering. He had spent his life making decisions based on logic, calculations, and strategy, but love wasn't a business deal. It wasn't about risk management or return on investment. It was messy, unpredictable, terrifying. And yet, staring into her eyes, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He didn't want a life without her. But not like this. Not in a grand hall filled with expectations and whispers of scandal. This wasn't them. Their love had never been about luxury. It had been about raw, unfiltered moments that made life feel real. He reached for her hand, his grip firm yet gentle. Let's get out of here, he whispered. For a second, she didn't move, her breath caught in her throat. But then, with a single nod, she laced her fingers through his, and together they turned. Gasps rippled through the crowd as Ethan led her down the aisle. Not toward vows written for a life of status, but toward something far greater. A future they would write on their own terms. One free from expectations. One built on love, not legacy. Hours later, in the quiet of Silver Creek, they stood beneath the same starlit sky where their love had blossomed. No extravagant decor, no cameras flashing, just them, the sound of crickets, the warmth of a bonfire, the scent of pine in the air. With nothing but the moon as their witness, they exchanged vows that needed no rehearsing. I don't care about your past, Ethan murmured, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I care about who you are now, about who we are together. And that was the only truth that mattered. Instead of a honeymoon in some distant paradise, They stayed right where their hearts belonged. They traded high rises for the quiet hum of a small-town morning, billion-dollar deals for something much simpler, but infinitely richer. Together, they opened a cafe, a place where people could gather, share stories, and find warmth in the simplest of things. Ethan, once a man obsessed with power, found something far greater in the everyday joys of running the little shop with Sophie by his side. Silver Creek wasn't just where they had met. It was where they had found themselves. Where Ethan had learned that happiness wasn't measured in wealth, but in the people we choose to share our lives with. And where Sophie, once lost between two worlds, had finally found a place to call home. Their story wasn't one of fairy tales or flawless romance. It was real, it was raw, and it was theirs. As the years passed, Ethan never once missed the world he had left behind. Not the boardrooms, not the endless race for more, because now he had everything. A love that was tested, but never broken. A life that wasn't perfect, but was beautifully, undeniably real. And every morning, as he watched Sophie laugh over a cup of coffee, he knew walking away from that wedding had been the best decision he had ever made. Because in the end, love isn't about the wealth we inherit or the names we carry. It's about who we choose every single day. And Ethan had made his choice. Love isn't always simple, and trust, it's even harder to hold on to when the past refuses to stay buried. Ethan thought he had found something pure, something untouched by the weight of wealth and expectation. But life has a way of testing even the strongest hearts. Would you have forgiven Sophie? Could you have looked past the lies and seen the love beneath them? This is more than just a touching story. It's a reminder that real love isn't about perfection. It's about choices, about seeing someone's flaws and still choosing to stand by them. And maybe, just maybe, that's what makes love worth fighting for. But now I want to hear from you. If you were in Ethan's shoes, would you have walked away or would you have stayed? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget, if you love real stories that pull at your heartstrings, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss the next emotional story we bring to life. See you in the next one.